All right. We get questions about this all the time on the channel. I'm sure you understand why. Yes, I do. And here it is. If Earth's magnetic poles were to suddenly flip, and I mean without any further magnetic excursion, would anything bad happen? Well, it depends on your definition of bad, I guess. Let's keep rolling. Let's say, for the sake of the illustration, that the poles reverse and then begin moving back toward the geographic poles at the same rate they're moving away currently. All right, so well, one thing is a lot would depend on the time it takes for the poles to reverse. So, for example, like we have Faraday's law of induction, all right, which states that there is an electromotive force created when the magnetic flux through some conductor changes. And you can consider like the oceans and the crust and the ionosphere as, roughly speaking, a conductor, all right? So the faster the flux would change, the faster the poles would flip, the higher would be the electromotive force applied to all these mediums, like whether it's the Earth's crust, actually the mantle as well, like whatever is lying underneath the crust, and the oceans and the ionosphere, right? And like if it happens really fast, like within an hour, let's say, I've just made a calculation that in the ionosphere, the current that would be provoked by this electromotive force, again as per Faraday's law of induction, because of the change in the magnetic flux, would be something like 10 to the 16 amperes. That's a pretty strong current. And this current again would create its own magnetic field, which also would be somewhat disruptive. And I mean, like it's a global, right? 10 to the 16 amperes. So that would be, how do they call it? Tens of peta-amperes. Right? That's a pretty big number. But it's global, which means that, you know, the current density wouldn't be so high. It would be maybe something like milliamperes per meter squared in the ionosphere, I repeat. And we should expect something like this in the oceans as well. So, well, that's a pretty strong current globally, all right? And it would create its own magnetic field, which would kind of try to, how would you say it, like mimic the previous magnetic field that we've had, right? So that the current would flow from east to west, just in case you're interested. Then we will get the same magnetic field we've had previously. So that would be, in my eyes, the most disruptive thing that can happen because of the pole reversal, that like this induced current. But then again, it's if it happens within hours, right? If it happens within years, then you can disregard this. Like it doesn't matter. It would be too small, the current. It wouldn't do anything. One other thing I thought about is that you know, there's quite a bit, like let's assume this is Earth just for the sake of illustration. So we have this magnetic field, right? It's actually exiting South Pole lines of force, the lines of magnetic field rather. Exiting the South Pole, entering the North Pole, right? And we have these, since there's the field is stronger at the poles, the particles bounce back and forth. It's so-called magnetic mirroring effect, right? And we have Van Allen belts because of this. So if you start like distorting this field somehow, like this, for example, like during the pole flip, these particles would start flying around like crazy, right? So we may expect something like a heavy particle participation event as well. So roughly speaking, Van Allen belts would be drained, you know, and then the particles would fall onto the ionosphere and maybe even further. And these are pretty strong, pretty energetic particles, right? Like the protons have some like mega electron volt energies, maybe, I'm not sure actually, but that's a pretty high energy particles, right? So that would increase the ionospheric conductance some more because it would ionize the neutral atoms, and it would, like, just by virtue of there being more charged particles in the first place, the conductivity would increase, which would only make this current that I talked about stronger. But that's about it. Like once the flip happens, like there isn't much to talk about. Like everything proceeds as normal since then. I mean, maybe, like, obviously we'd have problems with navigation, right, using the magnetic field, not only we with our compasses, but perhaps some animals as well. I'm not sure how it works exactly in animals. So maybe they use like not just the direction itself, but also like the intensity of the field. Like I don't know, but I would probably expect a lot of problems in animals in this respect. But again, animals aren't inanimate, no pun intended, so they can adapt. They can adapt pretty quickly, as practice shows. So yeah. So during the flip, long story short, there would be a pretty strong current, and how strong it depends on how fast the flip is happening. And I would also expect like some sort of like Van Allen belts drain event of sorts. But I can't think of anything else. And after the flip happens, you can only expect like problems with navigation. And right now, for example, like the strong currents are being induced when we have BZ negative from the solar wind, right? When the direction of the magnetic field of the solar wind is the same as the direction of the Earth's magnetic field. And obviously after the flip it would be the reverse. So BZ positive would lead to a stronger auroral current response. But again, it's kind of obvious. Yeah, I don't think I can think of anything else in this respect. So there you go.